On today's show, should the Cleveland Cavaliers get in the Dillon Brooks market, and what other kind of free agents are out there on the wing? Why it's going to be hard for Cleveland to get the kind of wing it needs. We'll talk about it on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, I'm Chris Manning from Fear the Sword from Magazine, the Just Basketball Show. That man over there is Evan Dammarrell. He is the founder of independent site Right Down Euclid, covering the whole entire Cleveland sports scene. As always, we are produced by Jake Stevens. For parts that fit, by the way, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with the Guaranteed Fit, ebay.com, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thanks again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Evan, let's talk in segment one here about the Cavs wing situation. So here's where I stand at it right now. As we think about this in May, we have about 2 months until free agency, and you can bet your bottom dollar that we will be doing, an analysis of the various wing targets as podcast segments, as podcast episodes in the lead up to free agency. Probably more than the draft because the Cavs have like second round draft pick. What?
Which Kobe Altman told me, we'll consider trading it, using it in a two-way guy, or stashing it overseas, which is the most non-answer answer I could have gotten for that question.
That is the answer a president of basketball operations gives when he is in a media scrum talking to a bunch of people and wants to say like nothing in particular. That's what that is. But here's just, you look at the free agency market. I wouldn't feel great about this market if you're Cleveland. You have Kyle Kuzma. You're not going to get on him financially. Ditto for Jeremy Grant. Jay Crowder is older and didn't play in the Bucks. You got knocked out of the playoffs. Then you get into like some weird stuff. We'll talk about Dillon Brooks, who wants like $25 million apparently. Which okay, Kelly Oubre.
I too want $25 million, but
yes. Kelly Oubre is out there. Okay, Grant Williams would be a really nice get, but that is someone who's probably only available in a sign and trade, and I have no idea how realistic that is for what Cleveland could offer. Harrison Barnes would make sense to me, but you look at what you just saw from him with the Kings, and that's a guy whose shooting got really ignored, and is that really solving your problem if you're Cleveland? It's not. So Evan, I look at the wing market, and I look at what realistic options the Cavs have as of right now with the assets they have and everything. I think you're basically looking at stand-in and placeholders. I don't think you're getting or have the means necessarily to even get the kind of player that would really fix this issue for you.
No, and it's unfortunate because in terms of wing depth moves, the Cavs biggest signing will probably be Karis LeVert on some type of extension, but the market other than that is not super duper inspiring. Like you mentioned, there's Grant Williams, who makes sense in a vacuum for Cleveland, just how they play, but there's that guy. Maybe Dillon Brooks if you ignore the Donovan Mitchell factor of it all, and you're like, okay, we're fine with losing Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks in a few years. And then there's guys that are a little bit of they're a clear upgrade over what Cleveland was starting at the 3, or whether it's just playing depth on the wing, whether it's Harrison Barnes, or if you get in the nitty gritty of it, like Josh Richardson or Miami's Max Strus, or even Brooklyn's Cam Johnson, if Brooklyn doesn't want to match any offers for Cam Johnson because he's a restricted free agent. But this is not the ideal year free agency wise for Cleveland to have their full non-taxpayer mid-level exception and just use that as a bargaining chip, or rather a means to upgrade the back end of the rotation or the starting 5 to just round out this young core 4 that you've assembled of Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen.
What I look at some of these like some of the things you could do, I don't think are like bad, like 1 year stopgap. Right, like if you told me I could get like Harrison Barnes for like the mid-level for a year, I would do it. I don't know I don't know what that looks like. Kelly Oubre for like a year as like a stopgap, I get it. Like, and if you wanted to skew smaller, like a name I really like, and we'll talk about him later, is like in the summer is Dante DiVincenzo is like a guard kind of wing filler. I like that type of archetype of player. He might be available and that'd be part of the mid-level, but you look at any of these names. And look, I don't even know with the price of good with the price of what good wings are if you're solving this need in free agency anymore. It might we might be at a point in the league, and I think we'll see how this kind of bears fruit. But I think to get the wings that really are needle movers at that position, it's going to require draft capital. It's going to require trading for them and giving up draft capital, lots of money that, maybe it's your big free agency splurge, but it's got to be a very situation. So probably a bad team buying an upgrade as a to complement other young players. The Cavs are not in that position. And it's going to require hitting on draft picks. Like I think the move that Cleveland can do to solve their wing issue, barring a trade, barring like a Jared Allen trade, matching the right salary and manifesting yourself something, or you can get one of the guys from the Nets that's maybe I think a little better than some of these guys. But even they're kind of still stopgappy to me. I think you're really looking at like, hey, we have to do this and improve this and give ourselves some upgrades, but also like really got to try to get 5-6 young guys in the building in the next couple of years and try to develop them as many as we can.
So let me float you this: what draft picks are Cleveland, or what draft picks is Cleveland hitting on at this point? Because they've committed to farm Donovan Mitchell as they should, but.
I mean, you have to find guys that can be. This is about getting lucky on some seconds. This is about your first round pick in 2024. That's
tough.
It's tough, but it's like that's the situation you're in. That's what you have to do at this point.
No, I agree, but like thinking that, hey, oh my God, I'm scrolling right now. Cleveland is currently picking 49th overall because of Golden State. Yeah. Assuming they're able to develop like a rotation caliber like 3-year wing player is slim. Like sure, Dean Wade and Lamar Stevens and maybe Isaiah Mobley is like case points of wing players, or just not wing players, just players in general developing like the G League and whatever. But then that answers my other question, or at least leads into my other question. What assets do the Cavs have to make like a tangible move to upgrade to 3? Because like that's the glaring issue, because Isaac Okoro didn't have that leap we were hoping for heading into year 3. And sure, you can mention the COVID year, everything notwithstanding, but Okoro just hasn't been the permanent answer at the starting 3 spot for Cleveland, and most teams don't have a permanent answer at the 3 spot. Otherwise, they're contending at this point, but it's hard to think like what can the Cavs do navigation wise, other than like saying, okay, we should trade Jared Allen for assets so we can like reload the chamber a little bit so we can go get that's possible starting 3, because it's either that or the mid-level exception at this point.
Yeah. And look, I understand this stuff is slim. That's baked into this. But I think like I think
that's what I'm trying to like crystallize in this first segment, is just like the Cavs options to make like tangible upgrades on the perimeter is increasingly slim as we break this down in the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, but that's where this gets you. This is what happens when you traded a bunch of stuff. This is the reality all teams get into when they're trying to compete at the highest level. You have to find ways to succeed in these different ways and get like some of this is luck. Some of this is just like, okay, maybe you got there. Maybe a guy fell in the. Maybe you find your version of like Austin Reeves, or you find your version of like. You find like a Draymond who like, or even like half of Draymond, who's like a generational guy in his case, and you get lucky. Like some of this is luck. Some of this is just getting lucky. Some of this means you find the right free agent who improves and you don't expect it to, or like you get just enough, and like other factors contribute to covering for maybe the lack of a need. Like maybe Okoro comes back next year and looks better. Maybe like Evan Mobley ascends another level defensively and kind of helps you ease some of your burdens. Maybe he adds a jump shot, right? Like there are things that can also help this. But I think part of this is just going to be like, you got it. Like, we know what all of these free agency guys are. We know exactly what they are. I think you're going to dive into second round picks. We'll talk after this break about someone who we very much know who he is. And like, there's a profile of him that I think makes sense but let's just say I'm a little bit skeptical. And I think everyone probably is. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. It is so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. I am a living testament to this. But when we spend all of our time going and giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools you need to find more balance in your life, so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. I've been going to therapy for a long time. It has been a staple in my life. I go like every other week at this point, and I'm not even the most well-adjusted person, but I would be much less well-adjusted without regular therapy. Find more balance. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's HELP help.com/LockedOnNBA. So Dillon Brooks, okay? Evan, here's
my
where
noise from this segment is similar to the last segment. Like, whew.
What I think with Dillon Brooks is I number one, I think JJ Redick, there's a going around of him from First Take that I found very like logical. And I also think like we've gotten like over ourselves and like talking about like there's a series with LeBron James and Curry going on right now, and like there's still all this like Dillon Brooks, who's like the sixth best player in the Warriors. Like what are we doing? Let's talk about the hoop. But I am of two minds in Brooks. Number one, I think like what he is like a tough guy as that kind of presence, and on the wing is not like an unuseful thing.
Mm-hmm.
His brand of it to me just goes like, I think like he went a little bit too far in where he took it in the playoffs. Like I think it was like part of an overall kind of Grizzlies issues, but I think it's part of the problem. The other side of it is that like he wants a pay raise. He has talked about wanting like $25 million. That has been the reported figure out there. And he's talked about, he had, exit interview quotes where he's like, I believe I can do more. I wasn't fully utilized. If you're Cleveland and you're trying to sign Dillon Brooks, aside from the issue of like, does this guy like fit in your culture, in your locker room, someone you want? Like, I don't know if my wing splurge is on a guy who believes he can do more and wants to be more and all of these things. I don't know if that is even like the right fit for you.
So from like a player aspect, like how he plays, like Dillon Brooks fits the mold of what the Cavs want to be in terms of, hey, we're a team that imposes our will at home or on the road, however you want to look at it. But I just, like you said, like I don't see Brooks being like a crystal clean fit for this locker room for Cleveland. And on paper, sure, I talked about this with Pete Bukowski when I was on Locked on Sports Today or whichever show Pete hosts. But either way,
that's the show. I doubt you were on Locked on Packers.
You never know. I have some takes.
Okay, but I don't think
I'm a Christian Watson dynasty investor at this point. But Pete used a segment. But either way, the Cavs need a guy who can kind of like enforce that edge, enforce that will, like at least come postseason time. And you look at guys, sure, Dillon Brooks is in this stratosphere, or there's Draymond Green, or there's just guys who like play with, or Steven Adams as well, like guys who play with like a certain edge to them. And if you're looking at the Cavs, like sure, they say all the right things, but they kind of lack that grit, that tenacity, that whether it's JV Bickerstaff or the fan base or the front office or whoever in between is just like expecting this Cavs team. Like there's a guy that embodies that. Like sure, on paper, Dillon Brooks embodies that, but I jokingly said this the other day. I don't want to say that this is a guaranteed path to like the Cavs losing Donovan Mitchell, but like Dillon Brooks and Donovan Mitchell don't like each other. Like it's pretty clear at this point.
At least Donovan Mitchell doesn't like Dillon Brooks. I don't know if we exactly understand how Dillon Brooks like feels the other way, but they did get a bust up, and then Donovan Mitchell like talked a bunch of crap on him. So it probably isn't like best buds. You know what I mean? But
Dillon Brooks, if asked about the situation, would probably say, "Oh, nuts. I don't like Donovan Mitchell very much." But regardless, we talked about this earlier in the week. Like the Cavs kind of have to like tiptoe this awkward line of like courting Donovan Mitchell to keep him here long term. I feel like somehow bringing Dillon Brooks, and that's financials aside, like the number I continue to scoff at, because like Dillon Brooks is a fine enough player, but the money he's wanting is just not what I would sign him for if I was an NBA executive. But regardless, like if you're trying to keep Donovan Mitchell, who's your superstar, or the guy you traded the entire farm for, Dillon Brooks is not the dude you sign to just like keep him around long term and also like level you up to become like a legitimate championship team.
Here's also his 3-point percentage the last couple of years.
I was giving you the floor for this one because it's bad.
32.6% this year on 6 attempts per game, 30.9% last year on 4.7 attempts per game, 34.4, which is pretty good on 5.6 attempts in 3 years ago, and then 35.8 last. So the last years that has been a decline, and this year he took more threes than he ever has, which is good, but he's not making enough of them. And this like, let's say you bring Dillon Brooks in, it's the vibes are good enough. He brings you an edge. He gives you that stuff. Is he a good enough shooter to be a guy that is like 100% locked in for you in closing games because teams don't ignore him? The answer is no. And he also just like doesn't give you a ton else on offense. Like he is not a particularly like helpful offensive player in what he does. His value is defensively and being a pretty solid defender and all that stuff, and like maybe hitting the occasional three, getting hot at times. But he's not like again, you might not be able to get any player you get at the three is going to have some warts, but I don't know if these are the exact warts I would want to live with. I think if I'm Cleveland, there are other situations where I absolutely could see it. Like I think Miami, I think I could see Portland, I could see like Minnesota. Like there are teams where I totally could get them being like, all right, let's roll the dice in Dillon Brooks. I didn't like. I don't think what Shaq had to say, like where he like thinks he'll be out of the league, to me feels accurate. But I don't know if Cleveland's like the right place for that bet based on what they need and what they already have.
No, I agree. And like on paper, defensively, the at least rotation 3 through 5 between Brooks, Mobley, and Allen it's lethal, at least on paper, but culturally it would rock the boat a little bit too much. And I know like we're talking about a team that got finessed by the Knicks in the first round, but the Cavs are like an interesting enough spot where they cannot afford to like misdirect enough, and I think Dillon Brooks is a misdirection enough in the way that, hey, this could rock the boat way too much and just completely ruin what you're building.
I did just text someone that's a Wolf fan if I should be put in prison or is Dillon Brooks a good Wolves thing? And they said
the vibes of the Wolves are so bad at this point that.
But like, here's just like, this is not like. I don't think there's like any fan base that's like, heck yeah, brother, like let me get in the Dillon Brooks business right now.
I'm sure there's like Grizzlies fans that are on like a no-flight list at this point that they feel that way.
Yeah, I wonder what Sean Coleman thinks. Let's move on, Evan, to Kobe Altman, who finished second in NBA Executive of the Year voting. I think this is like always, these things are kind of funny.
They are.
Because like yes, he did a good job, right? he got Donovan Mitchell and like drafted Evan Mobley, and like the culmination of the last couple of years leads you to get to where you are now with what this group is, right? But it's also like, oh, like there's clearly some holes in the roster, and you know, like this roster isn't quite where it needs to be. You know, so the voting is Monty McNair from the Kings wins. Kobe Altman finished second. Jazz GM Justin Zanuck and Denver Nuggets GM Calvin Booth tied for third. Funny that that was a distant third, but it's like funny that like the Jazz GM who traded Donovan Mitchell like his third. Just like funny how like these trades can be two-way streets sometimes.
Listen, man, the guy who interrupted Paolo Banchero from being unanimous Rookie of the Year saved Justin Zanuck's case.
Yeah, Walker Kessler's good, but
he's great.
But whatever. I think that I've been thinking about this, Evan. I think there's more, not like in terms of like maybe not even. I don't even know exactly why I got to this point, but I kind of like feel like there should be more scrutiny on Altman, more so than like all the stuff directed at JB Bickerstaff. That is kind of where I'm at. Even with like, I think he deserved to get recognition for the job he did. Like they should take some victory laps. Like they've done a really good job to elevate the franchise in a relatively short amount of time post LeBron James. Like better than any Cavs GM did last time, right? We didn't have he didn't do a Chris Grant or like David Griffin got LeBron back. Like these are different things. But I do think like this is time to like kind of maybe like continue whatever this is and figure that there's a lot of pressure I think on Kobe to get this summer right.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like you made the move to go get your superstar in Donovan Mitchell, and you're trying to navigate like the trepidations of getting flamed out in the first round of the NBA playoffs. It's hard to figure out the next steps for Kobe, but with your David Griffin comparison, it's easier and harder at the same time with LeBron on your roster. But in terms of like Kobe's sake, like they are figuring out the next steps, and I agree with you to an extent. Like I think what JB did come postseason time, whether it's playing Ricky Rubio off the bench in games 3 and 4, or starting Karis LeVert 3 through 5, or just like relegating Isaac Okoro to the bench. Like there's a lot of more questions than answers about this Cavs team going forward. And credit where credit's due, like Kobe Altman in his exit interview cited like the regular season success for the Cavs, and I agree with Jason Lloyd in this one. Like you give the flowers to this iteration of the Cavs. Like yeah, they're a regular season success, but going forward, like you're trying to maintain this balance of the superstar you traded for in Donovan Mitchell, and on the other end of the spectrum, like contending for the playoffs and finding a happy medium in between the two to keep Mitchell in here long term. Like Altman's future will be decided whether it's this offseason or if they're able to like just punt it down the road long enough for next offseason. We'll figure it out, but I think the Donovan Mitchell trade and just like materializing it together maybe give you the benefit of the doubt. And it's worth noting that like these rewards were voted for before the postseason began.
Yeah.
In terms of like media voting. So the Cavs do have the benefit of the doubt. Like Chris and I heading into this series, like probably felt more confident about the Cavs. Maybe the fact that like they're playing into the second round, whether it's against, well, Miami in this case, but regardless, Altman did the right moves up to this point. He drafted for best player available. Like I questioned drafting Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. Thank God I was wrong. Or like drafting Evan Mobley, like was a player that fell under the lap, or like being pragmatic and productive and opportunistic and like getting Jared Allen, or just like working within the margins. And now, like, we'll see. Is he worthy of being considered the second best GM in the NBA? We'll see. Can he build upon like this rock solid foundation he's built? We'll see. And I don't know, I'm shrugging my shoulders. Like Monty McNair makes a ton of sense because Sacramento was just like such a revelation this year. But we'll see how Altman performs this upcoming offseason.
last thing we'll end on this. Is there any like random role guy you wish you could like clone that you've seen in the playoffs? And if you give me like a star, Evan, like if you say Andrew Wiggins, like that doesn't count. Give me like a real role. Give me like a real role guy who you've seen in the playoffs, who has really impressed you, and you'd be like, oh, I'd like to clone that guy and put him on the Cavs.
I was gonna say Chris Middleton before the injury season, but
that's also not what I'm at. Like you're like
I know. Before he said in this playoffs, I'm like, oh, Chris Middleton before this season.
I mean, he was in the play, but like I want like an actual role guy, not like a guy who's got a player option for $40 million.
Not just that, but like I've been on record as saying if I can copy and paste Chris Middleton, I'd apply him to every team and just make him better. But shoot. Probably, at least from like looking for a Cavs perspective, like Jared Vanderbilt would be fun.
Okay.
In terms of like the defensive upside and like the length and physicality that he plays with, like JB Bickerstaff might be hard pressed to find like a permanent answer to the starting three, but like if Vanderbilt enough, and I'm thinking like salary and just like player profile in general, like fits the mold of what the like at least what the Cavs need in terms of like defending the three on a consistent basis.
Yeah, the shooting would be like still a concern there. Like that's why you saw him pulled a little bit in game one. I have DiVincenzo stock, even though like he really struggled shooting. But like I like that kind of guard. I remain a D'Anthony Melton fan. Like any of those
bigger, you say Dillon Brooks long term.
Any of those like bigger like two guards who can like defend up, like in the Celtics Sixers game right now, Derek White opened the game defending Tobias Harris. Like, give me a guard like that, brother. Like, let's go. I love that stuff. Those would be two.
Derek White would be like a permanent game two notwithstanding, but like a permanent answer for like the Ricky Rubio question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like the kind of thing that Caruso would be, or like TJ McConnell.
Grant Williams on paper makes sense, rather than I'm going to make both Grant Williams, but Grant Williams until the closing moments of the game makes sense for the Cavs on paper.
You know who else is pretty, even though he hasn't shot as one around two, Josh Hart would also be nice.
Oh, Josh Hart. That was probably one of the better deadline moves for any NBA team, just because he's been a culture dude for them, and I like jokingly texted a buddy, shout out to Cy, but one of my groomsmen, but like Josh Hart going to the Knicks was like a culture signing for New York, and the fact that like he is just the most New York player, or like most Tom Thibodeau player possible. Yeah,
100%. All right. Let's end it there. I'm Chris Manning. That's Evan Dammarrell. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for producing Everydayers. We're going to be back in the coming days talking about Darius Garland's season, where he goes from here, and what the playoffs told us about him. Until next time, I'm Chris. That's Evan. Enjoy the hoops. There's a lot of good basketball, even though the Cavs are no longer in it because they lost to the freaking Knicks.